Okay, in this video I'm going to be going over examples of how to use labels and buses to kind of make it easier to make some connections in more complicated or larger schematics. So let's just start with a simple example here. Let's say, for example, I'm just going to use a common part that you're probably tired of looking at, but let's say we're looking at this device here, the 4017 here, which we've used. It's a Johnson counter, which means that every time a pulse comes in, the outputs sequentially change. One keeps traveling down from Q0 to Q9 and then circling back. But let's say, for example, that we've got a bunch of LEDs or something that we want to connect to, but in a different part of the schematic. Okay, so I put a bunch of LEDs on here, and this could be further out in the schematic or even on a different page. And traditionally, the way we'd wire these up is we'd click on net and run a trace, for example, or a net over there to there, and continue on like this for every connection, which is fine. However, if there were other parts in the middle here, or if these LEDs were on another page or further away, it gets to be kind of hard to read the schematic and it gets a little bit messy. So the other common way that we do this is by creating what are called nets. And a net is essentially a group of connections that, as long as they share the same name, it can make the same electrical connection between those points, even though the buses are not physically connected together on the schematic. So that's a lot of words. Let me try to explain what I mean here. So for example, I can draw a bus here like this. I'm going to click OK. Whoops. And then I'm going to name it, and I'll call it LED 0 dot dot, or I'll make it 1. 1 dot dot 8. And what this is kind of creating, if this looks familiar to you, yeah, if I can get it right, there we go, sorry. What it kind of looks almost like is an array, right? And that's kind of what it is. It's an array of connections. It also has a little tick here to place a label, and I'm going to click OK, and we'll talk about labels a little bit more. Okay, so it puts a label there. Now, what I'm going to do is make connections to each one of those nets that are inside of there, internally connected. So for example, Q0, I'm going to connect to LED1. Again, I'm using the net command here. I'm going to click there and go to net LED2, 3, and so forth. Now, if you realize I made a little mistake here, I've got 10 outputs and 10 LEDs, but I only made an 8 array. So I'm going to change the name of this. Sorry about that. And I'm going to change it 1 dot dot 10, because we actually have 10 connections to make. And then I can finish connecting the last two nets here. I'll go to LED 9 and LED 10. Okay, and you go, well, that's great. That looks nice. But what's the point of it? Well, what we can do is copy this net and move it over here. And I'm going to lengthen it. And now what I'm going to do is connect the LEDs to the same net, or the same array, rather. Let's try that one more time. Connected to the same bus. Okay, so we have LED 1 there, LED 2, LED 3, and so on. And I'm going to connect the last one here, LED 10. LED 10. There we go. So, now the weird thing about this is at first you think, well, wait, that doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense. There are no wires connected between them. But because they share the same name, it's still electrically connected. So for example, if I click on the eyeball symbol, and it's a little hard to see this light up, but if I click on this net, whoops, let's try that again. Eyeball symbol, the show button, and click on this, you'll see that it lights up here and here. And LED 2, LED 3, and so on. And when you're doing this, I'd actually highly recommend that you check these connections, because it's very easy to have the same name for two adjacent nets, and that would connect them together. Okay? So on the board, if we switch to a board, this is what we'd end up with. Here's our 4017. Here's our LED display, and it's showing all the connections there. And those are the same connections that you see, but even though you can't physically see the connection. Now, sometimes people like to kind of draw the bus so it goes up here and runs over and connects so you can physically see where the connection is. But the other way of doing this is by adding a label. And if we click on that, if we click on the bus here, we can add a label. And that shows that these are the same connections between those points. Now, let me show you another way you can do this for individual connections. Let's say, for example, we had like a resistor or something that needed to connect to this CO pin here, but it was further away or in a different part of the schematic. So I'm going to add a resistor here. And I'm going to put it over here, for example. Now what we can do is have a net here. So I'm clicking on net, putting a net here, and I'm going to name it. And I'm going to call it CO, carry out. Be any name you want, but that one seems to make sense. Okay. Now by default, this is important. By default, it will just put text for the name like this. But what's kind of cool is if you go up here, there's a selection for a different kind of way of just showing the net. And it's by using these little kind of flags. So I've made a connection there. And what I can do is I'm going to add a net here to this resistor. And I'm going to name it the same thing. Now, to me, it's dangerous for me just to name it and type it, especially if it's a long name. So what I'm going to do is actually click on the name of that net and copy it, use Control-C, and I'm going to name this one the same thing. And now I right-click twice to get that. Now I've got a connection between these 2 points here and here, and when I click on it, you see it lights up. If I switch to the board, you can see that that is now also connected to the resistor. Even though the net isn't physically wired on the schematic, it's still making an electrical connection. Now, some people like to actually put labels for all their pin names on their nets, and let me show you a way to do that. So I physically moved the net over from there up to here. And what I'm going to do is extend that net, and I'm going to change, instead of the line being orthogonal, allow me to bend it at an angle like this. And this is commonly done just to show that it's a bus connection. But let me show you the other advantage here. Let's say I want to move this over. I'm going to move this over a little bit just to make a little bit more space. Like that. Now what I can also do is name, if I wanted to, label rather. And I'm going to go back to the text name, and I'm going to put, for example, LED 10 on that pin, so we know which one is actually connected to LED 10. Now that size is kind of large. I'm going to change it to 0.04. So, and I got to change my grid also. Come on, let's try that again. Ugh. Okay, going up here and I'm going to click grid and change it to 0.025, make it a little finer bit of a grid. And I'm going to put a label there, and a label there, and so forth. And that lets you see exactly which pin is connected to which of the wires inside of that bus. And I could do the same thing with the LEDs over here too, even though I use the same naming convention. So this is a common way of being able to have lots of connections in the schematic, but it really cleans things up. Now, when you get to the assignment this week where you're going to be adding the microcontroller part to your lab, you're going to be doing this. You're going to be adding these labels, and you're going to be adding buses. When you do this, please use the exact same naming convention as I have. So, for example, we have alarm out, hour set. We have 7 segment, 0 through 3, etc. Please follow those conventions because that's going to be connected to other parts on the schematic where we're going to actually be adding these other parts. Okay, so that's buses and labels, and hopefully that'll help you get through your schematic.